The Wizard of Oz is one of the world's best-loved fairy tales. Dorothy's journey to the magical land of Oz conjures up nostalgic thoughts of childhood Christmases hiding behind the sofa from the Wicked Witch of the West, or those evil flying monkeys. Surely the furthest things from our minds would be deflation, fiscal crisis and monetary policy. But we'd be wrong. The Wizard of Oz is not just a children's story, it is an economic parable, strongly rooted in the bitter political controversies of late 19th century America. Let me explain. The legendary 1939 film starring a young Judy Garland was based on an equally famous book. Written by Lyman Frank Baum, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz tells the story of an orphaned Kansas girl, Dorothy Gale, and her beloved dog Toto, who get swept up by a tornado that transports them to the magical land of Oz. Baum published his book in 1899. At the tail end of a decade of unprecedented political and economic turmoil. Western Plains farmers, after enjoying healthy profits in their early homesteading years, gradually witnessed a relentless decline in the profitability of their farms. Ironically, the main problem was not caused by poor harvests or the failure of plains farming, but rather its remarkable success. Agricultural technology was improving rapidly in the late 19th century. However, this led to a period of chronic overproduction. Too much food was being produced, and from year to year the price per bushel of wheat declined. To make matters worse, the 70s, 80s and early 90s was a period of deflation, where the amount of money in circulation failed to keep pace with economic growth and the rise in population. While deflation is good for creditors, it is bad news for debtors because the real value of the money they owe keeps rising. Thus, in the final decade of the 19th century, plains farmers found themselves in a baffling and often infuriating situation. Many had taken incredible risks to establish their farms, often working themselves half to death along the way. But the more food they produced, the poorer they seemed to get. In the meantime, everyone else seemed to be benefiting from their success. City dwellers now had cheap and abundant food. Bankers were profiting from the farmers' repayment of loans in ever more valuable money. And the railroad companies, on whose operation plains farming depended, exploited their monopoly, charging exorbitant sums to ship their produce to market. Southern sharecroppers in the South also faced similar problems of oversupply. They produced big annual harvests that had to compete with new Indian and Egyptian cotton on the world market, and they also spiraled into debt. Many blamed the US government's refusal to leave the gold standard, calling for silver to be used to back more paper money in the economy. By the early 1890s, farmers in the South and West began to create organizations to further their demands. They set up cooperative marketing arrangements to bypass greedy grain elevator companies and campaigned for state laws to regulate railroad rates. Black sharecroppers in the South faced the same economic conditions and in an unlikely alliance made common cause with the whites. Unlikely in the South because it crossed the color line, and unlikely between the two regions because it allied Union Army veterans from Midwestern farms with ex-Confederate soldiers. However, in 1892 they managed to put aside their differences, forming the People's Party, also known as the Populists. The Populists were the most important potential third party in modern American history. Ignatius Donnelly of Minnesota wrote the party's platform. Among other things, the Populists supported direct election of senators, free coinage of silver, a graduated income tax, an 8-hour workday to woo industrial workers, and a ban on immigration. This last point was added because many members theorized that a conspiracy of British, Jewish, and Yankee bankers had deliberately created the Depression of the 1890s to worsen the farmers' plight. The Populist 1892 presidential candidate was James Weaver, a former Union Army general. He won 1 million votes and carried 4 states: Nevada, Colorado, Idaho, and Kansas. The appeal for free silver was a popular one, and the Democratic Party quickly moved to jump on the bandwagon. In 1896, they chose the charismatic orator William Jennings Bryan as their presidential candidate. Bryan had electrified his party's Chicago convention when he made a speech claiming that Americans were being crucified on a cross of gold. The Populists met 2 weeks later in St. Louis, and in an unconventional move, also chose Bryan as their presidential candidate. This proved to be a fateful mistake, dooming the Populists' electoral prospects. Jennings never formally accepted their nomination, and the Democrats increasingly stole their political ground. The Republican candidate, William McKinley, won the election over both the Democrats and the People's Party, and the populist dream lay in ruins. Now, what on earth, you may ask, does all this have to do with The Wizard of Oz? Well, in 1964, high school teacher Henry Littlefield wrote an article pointing out an underlying populist allegory in Baum's book. He argued the characters clearly represented the personalities and themes of late 19th century America. For example, Littlefield explained, in the early pages of Baum's book there is a vivid description of a grim plains landscape. Grey, featureless and miserable. In the movie, it is only when Dorothy leaves Kansas that the black and white film switches to colour. While Dorothy symbolises the spirit of the ordinary American citizen, her unusual companions represent the major players in the political drama of the Populists. The Tin Woodman is the industrial worker, while the Scarecrow represents the long-suffering plains farmer. The Cowardly Lion is William Jennings Bryan, a good roar but deep down a coward. Bryan failed to win votes from Eastern urban workers in the 1896 election, and in the same way in the book, the lion's claws are nearly blunted by the woodman's metallic shell.
Come on, get up and fight, you shivering junkyard.
The Wicked Witch of the West is associated with a variety of controversial personalities, chief among them the industrialist Mark Hanna, campaign manager to President William McKinley. The winged monkeys are the immigrants being used as cheap labour to build the railroads and are exploited by the Wicked Witch of the West. She herself is killed by having water thrown on her.
You cursed rat! Look what you've done! I'm melting! Melting! Oh.
Representing an end to the miserable droughts that plagued the lives of plains farmers. The death of her sister, the Wicked Witch of the East, draws a clearer parallel, as she is killed when a farmhouse falls on her. The world of Oz itself is also similarly symbolic. The yellow brick road symbolises the gold standard. The Emerald City, Washington, D.C. In 1894, the Populist movement followed that yellow brick road when they marched on the Capitol to demand the president improve their plight. The president himself is the Wizard of Oz, who is exposed as being less than honest.
Has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
The Munchkins are the ordinary American citizens, yet none can help Dorothy return home. The only person who can help her is the nice witch, who, as you'd expect, comes like the populist sharecropping allies from the South. She tells Dorothy that her magical silver shoes have the power to take her back to Kansas. But surely that should be ruby slippers. Well, no. The shoes were changed to ruby in the movie because the camera was unable to pick up the silver colour. The implication is that gold alone cannot be the solution for the problems facing the average citizen.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home.
The populist demand for the use of silver with the gold standard was never met. Although within a few years inflation returned after discoveries of gold in South Africa allowed the release of more paper money into the economy. In one of the final scenes of Baum's story, Dorothy loses her silver slippers in the desert before she reaches home, a reflection of the decline of the silver cause after 1896. No matter how skeptical we might be, the parallels in Baum's book to the politics of his time are surely too hard to ignore. Many of the issues confronting populist farmers continued to plague their successors. American farming would be beset by overproduction throughout most of the 20th century, while southern sharecropping remained widespread and segregation continued. Disillusioned by politics, sadly, many white populists in the South turned to racism as a way of maintaining their status in the social pecking order. Only over time, when farming became less central to American life, did the grievances of the populists become less relevant. The percentage of the population working as farmers shrank steadily. By 1920, more than half of all Americans lived in cities, and farmers became only one of many special interest lobbies. Now, if you're still convinced The Wizard of Oz is nothing but a sweet children's fairy tale and has nothing to do with monetary deflation and the gold standard, then let me leave you with this. How is the weight of gold typically measured? In ounces, right? And what is the abbreviation for ounce?
To Oz? To Oz.
We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Here he is, the Wizard of a Wiz, if ever a Wiz there was. If ever a Wiz there was, the Wizard of Oz is one because of the wonderful things he does. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.